Hey everyone, this is Lisa from Life in Layouts, and today I am back with the Creating with the Sketches collaboration that I do with Nicole and a bunch of other very talented ladies. Today we're going to be using sketch option 2-page number 2. I pulled out my Doodlebug collection, The Great Outdoors, to document some photos of us fishing. I'm going to be using sketch option number 20 for this particular layout. This sketch calls for, surprise, surprise, stripes and stitching. So that's what I'm going to start out with. I decided that I wanted to use the color combination of yellow, blue, orange, brown, and green. When I'm using the Scrapbook Generation sketch, they are labeled and color coordinated. And so sometimes I will go off camera on my sketch and number them so that I have them in the order that these kind of sketch calls for. You can really put it in whatever order you like, but I just feel like it's just easier to not have to think about it. I do always take a photo of my configuration so that I can remember it later because I'm not very good at that. This time I did decide to ink up the edges of the strips. I haven't done that in a while with my stitching, but because the stitching was going differently than what I've been doing lately, I figured it would add a little extra touch to it. I pulled out my T-square ruler because I was trying to decide like where it needed to go on the layout and how much I needed to cut off of these strips. I do end up cutting off 2 inches, so the strips are 10 inches tall and 1 inch wide. And then of course I did have to ink up the top edges of the strips. Now I'm going to get these strips down and then my camera does cut off. So I start working on something else and it looks like I'm all over the place, but I had a thought process behind this. Once I got the strips down, I realized that I needed to mat my photo and I wanted to mat it on the white cardstock, and I should have matted it before I put the strips down, but didn't think about it. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just use the other side. I started working on that, so I put the right-hand side of the layout over to the side so I could work on that. The sketch calls for a grid of photos on the right-hand side of the layout, as well as a journaling card. And I didn't have any journaling cards that would work, so I decided to pull out the 6x6 pattern paper, and there was a piece of paper that had some fishes on it in tone-on-tone swimming pool color of Doodlebug, which is my favorite. So I cut that out and of course didn't cut it straight, so I did have to use my T-square ruler to trim off a little bit of the photo so that it would line up in a perfect grid. On the right hand side of the layout there's going to be a photo of all of us that went fishing, and then a picture of me with my very, very tiny fish that I caught, and a picture of my mom just being silly on the boat. And it's just gorgeous because I was actually able to capture the moon right underneath her arm on kind of the left side of the photo. Once I got all of the photos and the paper to line up evenly, I did go ahead and use my layering guides to cut out a border around the photos. I did just put up a tutorial a little while ago for these layering guides. I was getting lots of questions about them, and I thought it would be easier just to kind of put up a small video so that when people do ask me questions, I can refer back to that video, and there are step-by-step instructions on how to use the layering guides. There's also an affiliate link below. Just know that if you do purchase from my affiliate links, I do get a very small commission at no additional charge to you. So then once I got that grid put together, I am going to get back to the strips, I promise. I decided that I'd go ahead and put my photos down on that gutted white piece of paper since it was going to take a little bit to figure that out. So as I'm putting that down, I would like to encourage you guys to go check out all of the other ladies that are participating in this hop. I'm always excited to see what everyone else does with these sketches since there are so many different options and so many different things that you can do. I know there's not a lot of double page scrappers out there, so there are some single page options for the sketches as well, so it'd be interesting to see if anybody turned this double page sketch into a single page layout. So make sure you check them out below. Sketch option number 20 does call for a grid of photos. So the original sketch calls for a piece of pattern paper on the left hand side and then a smaller grid. But sketch 20 expands that grid out to 10 inches so that it lines up with the strips on the right. Once I started cutting down my photos, I realized that the sketch information is incorrect. If you'll notice there, I have 2 3x3 photos. It then said to cut the photo next to it at a 4x5. You cannot have 2 3x3 photos, which equals 6 inches, and next to it have a 4x5 photo. So I'm lucky that I only cut down one photo, and I was like, let me get them down on this grid and then I can figure out what I want to do. Especially since I had that big hole in the middle, I had to make sure that everything was laying down properly. I don't recommend doing this with a grid of photos. It works a lot better if you are doing just like a big sheet of paper or the strips like the right hand side of the layout, because it does cover a lot more. But I just made it work because I definitely wasn't going to waste white cardstock. So I'm just using my T-square ruler to make sure that the outer edges are all lined up straight. And then once I get all of that down, I go ahead and add that photo that I know is too short. I then use washi tape on the back to secure everything in place. And because there was lots of photos that were kind of mismatched, I did pull out a piece of white scrap and use that. And I know what you're thinking, why didn't I just use white scrap to mount my photos instead of gutting my paper? But the white paper that I did use on the background was significantly smaller, and it just helped using up some of my smaller pieces of white scrap. So once I got the grid down, I realized that I was just missing obviously 2 inches. So I went ahead and used the same 6x6 sheet of paper that I used on the right hand side with the tone on tone fishes and added it to the bottom. And I actually like that because I do have lots of photos over on the left, and that does just break it up just a little bit. So you now see that I brought back my larger mat on the right hand side of the layout on top of those strips. I'm going to add some journaling to the pattern paper with the fishes on it, but I also wanted to add a little bit of extra. I didn't want just journaling on that. So I decided that I was going to ink up the edges and then add some fun foam to that big grid as well. Once I get the fun foam on the back of the photos, I pull out my piercing tool, my ruler, and my mat to add a border around the edges. I struggle with making the corner borders. I kind of wish there was a tool to make that, but unfortunately there's not. So it's just me trying to figure out how far to go over before going up, making sure that it all lines up. So I do have to move the ruler around quite a bit to make sure that my corners are straight. This sketch calls for the stitching to go horizontal instead of vertical, and it just goes around the outer edge of the strips of paper. I pulled out my box of thread and I'm just trying to find a color that works well. I do end up going with this lighter color brown that matches the brown in the strips of paper. I did decide to leave a little bit of this in just to show you my technique. I do have a 6-strand embroidery thread and I pull them apart so that there's only 3 strands. That is a recommendation of Allison, and I actually like that thickness. I know some people use less, some people use all 6. It's really just a personal preference, so I would recommend you deciding which strands you want. I have seen some people use 2, and I have used 2 a couple of times when I'm doing smaller pieces, but 3 is my kind of go-to. Once I get the first 2 stitches in, then I go ahead and tie a knot on the back of it and then just do a running back stitch. And you can see here where I've started. And then I did all my stitching off camera on the right hand side of the layout as well as the left hand side of the layout. The sketch does call for the stitching to kind of go around both the left and right. I went ahead and added ATG to the back of my photo grid on the fun foam, but I've noticed lately when I was putting some layouts away that the fun foam really wasn't sticking, so I did decide to go ahead and add some liquid adhesive as well just to make sure that it stays down. With this Doodlebug collection, it does have quite a few of the fishing pieces, so I brought those out. On the right hand side there's this really big fishing pole, and I had to use quite a bit of fun foam to line it up with the photo grids, and it took me quite a bit to get it all straight because I wanted some of the fishing pole to be on the photo grid and some of it not to be, and it's kind of thin. I mean, even though it's a bigger piece, it's still a real thin piece because obviously fishing poles are not something that's a really wide item. So once I get that down, I was going to add this bucket of fish, but then I was like, I don't know if I really like that with the fishing pole, so I went ahead and pulled out this bucket of worms instead. I am going to use the bucket of fish over on the left hand side of the layout. So I did put the bucket of worms up on fun foam as well, and then overlapping the fishing pole just a little bit. Then I thought that the fishing pole and the bucket were just kind of like floating there. So I pulled out the 6x6 paper pad and I found this border strip that had the fishes on it. So I went ahead and just cut a little strip that would tuck underneath the photo border and then go all the way to the edge of the strips of paper. And then it gave the bucket of worms and the fishing pole just like a shelf to sit on. And then I wanted to add something else over there to the white part. So I did find this little worm that was in the dirt, so I added him. And then I pulled out the shape sprinkles and added just one little fish over there, which it kind of doesn't make sense with all the worms, but I was just going to go with it. Then on the 6x6 paper pad, and this is also in the 12x12, they have these little squares, which would be like 2x2, as well as some little tags that are kind of 3x4. But in the 6x6 paper pad, they are perfect for embellishments. I pulled out one tag that says, "This is the life," and it has a fishing pole with a little tackle box and a fish on the fishing pole. I cut off the white parts of it and then used the same brown ink to ink the edges. I also punched a little tiny hole in the tag top as well. And then in the little square paper, there was a green square that has some fishing worms on it, and it says, "Good things come to those who bait." And so I added that as well. But then I realized that I needed to add something else, so I did go ahead and pull out one of the other tags. On the back of the tags, they are just plain white with the toppers on it. So I found one that had the yellow in it, and I went ahead and added that next to the one that says, "This is the life." And I'm going to add the date to that later on. Then I start working on the embellishment cluster on the left-hand side. So this sketch basically spans both of the sides of the layout, and there's a cluster in the bottom left and a cluster in the top right. And so in the bottom left cluster, I'm going to go ahead and add that bucket of fish, and then also add the little sticker that says "Gone Fishing," and it has two fishes on it, and that's going to serve as my title. Then I did add another little fish right next to it. And then I'm going to add a little fish right next to the "Gone Fishing" sticker. And then right above it, I'm going to add like a little hook that has fly things on it. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not big on fishing, but I added that kind of at the top. It looks like it would be a hook that would go on the end of a fishing pole. And then I pulled out these shape sprinkles again and added 3 little tiny fishes. Now for this particular layout, I had a ton of photos. I'm actually going to get 23 photos on this layout with this insert in the middle. I consider having pocket pages as a middle insert as part of the layout. So this is a way to document a fun day, a ton of photos, and still have a ton of embellishments on my layouts as well. Most of the time with these pocket pages, they just are filled with photos. Maybe I'll do like 1 or 2 that have actual embellishments on it. But for this particular one, I just had one photo that had a lot of space at the top. So I went ahead and cut that down so that I could embellish a little bit on it. So I'm just lining up a piece of white cardstock at the top of my photo, because my plan was to use some of these little pieces of scraps that I had cut off from the right-hand side of the layout to add kind of the same type of border at the top of this photo. The 1-inch strip wasn't working, so I did cut it down to 3/4 of an inch, and I put them in the same order that they are on the right-hand side of the layout. I did go ahead and ink them up and then line them up so that they are on that white cardstock. The reason that I went ahead and added that white cardstock to the top of the photo was because I do plan on stitching on this little card as well. I'm not going to do a whole lot of stitching, but just a little added texture. So once I get that strips down, I go ahead and add that blue paper with the fish on it that was on the right-hand side of the layout, and that also brings in more elements from the layout, so it really ties in these photos to the layout. And then once I get that blue paper down, I then go ahead and pull out my stitching tools and poke my holes, and I just did a small line straight across the strips of paper. I had already put the thread away, so I did have to pull out my box and kind of match it up with what was on the layout. And then again, pulling the 6 strands apart so that I only have 3. And then once I get the 2 pieces started, I go ahead and tie a knot on the back of it. And then I just do a back stitch on that as well to match the layout. I did zoom in quite a bit so that you could see the embellishments that I'm going to add, but unfortunately I did forget that I was zoomed in, so it is kind of off camera a little bit. You are able to see everything. I went ahead and added the bucket of fish again, as well as one little tiny fish, and this is from the mini icons. I love buying all of the pieces from Doodlebug because there are times when I need the big pieces and the little pieces. I also added the tackle box and then a worm, as well as the worm that is in the dirt. When I use pocket pages, I do like to adhere my two photos together, and then making sure that they line up properly. I might need to paper shave, or in this case photo shave a little bit, to make sure that they are equal around all sides and I don't have any white showing. Alright everyone, that is it for this video. Here is my final layout as well as some close-ups. Make sure that you go check out everyone that is listed below to see their take on this sketch. I also have a link to this sketchbook if you would like to purchase it over at Scrapbook Generations. Alright everyone, if you enjoyed this video, if you wouldn't mind giving me a thumbs up, I would really appreciate it. If you haven't done so already and you want to see more double page layout inspiration, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thanks everyone for watching, and I hope that you have a scrappy day.